Hello and welcome to the Armenian News Network Groong Week in Review. This episode was recorded on Sunday, December 12, 2021. A quick reminder before we begin. Do you like our podcast and do you want to help us out? Well, please consider liking, subscribing to our channel, and sharing this episode with your friends on Twitter and Facebook. It means a lot to us. Thank you. I'm Hovik Manucharyan, and along with Asbed Bedrossian, here's what we have for you this week. Zoom for Democracy. What did Armenia's participation in the Summit for Democracy bring? What was Moscow's reaction to the summit? And how will Armenia's participation impact Armenia-Russia relations? Was Armenia able to use this opportunity to inform the world of Armenia's interests, or was this another missed opportunity? Domestic politics. What were the results of the December 5 municipal elections? Armenian opposition MPs released by the Constitutional Court. And another scandal this week involving Nikol Pashinyan's and Alin Simonyan's statements about Armenian POWs. Regional politics. Continuing tension over Ukraine and the Putin-Biden summit on Ukraine and the outcomes and impact for the region. Aliyev's ramp up on rhetoric and increased tensions on the border, demanding a corridor through Sunik. Armenia participates in the 3+2 platform in Moscow, while Georgia stays out. And lastly, Artsakh Independence at 30. How did Armenian authorities mark the 30th anniversary of the declaration of Artsakh's independence?
And to unpack these issues, we have with us Benyamin Poghosyan, who is the chairman of the Yerevan-based think tank Center for Political and Economic Strategic Studies, and Pietro Shakarian, who is a lecturer in history at the American University of Armenia in Yerevan. His research focuses on the history of Soviet Armenia and the Caucasus. Hello and welcome, everyone.
Hello, thank you very much, gentlemen, for having both of us on.
Hello.
Hello, Hovik. Hello, Asbed. It's a pleasure to participate in your podcast.
Absolutely, same here.
So we're recording this podcast over Zoom, but apparently Zoom can be used for much more important things. On December 9 and 10, Prime Minister Pashinyan joined Joe Biden's Summit for Democracy initiative. This was a remote summit with leaders of over 100 countries summiting via Zoom. From Armenia's region, only Armenia and Georgia were invited. Turkey, Azerbaijan, Russia, and Iran were excluded. Azerbaijan was clearly displeased at being left out and expressed their official displeasure through editorials. Other notable guests included Venezuelan opposition figure Juan Guaido, Belarusian opposition figure in self-imposed exile, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, and the unrecognized government of Taiwan. Russia and China complained loudly, and unprecedentedly so, that the US is weaponizing the summit against them. Pietro, what was the purpose of the summit, and are the loud Russian-Chinese complaints more mere propaganda, or should there be concerns that are taken seriously by countries who are participating in this endeavor, including Armenia?
I think if we're talking, Hovik, about propaganda, I think the summit itself was propaganda meant to advance US interests. I don't think it was, or at least interests of the American foreign policy establishment, what they call in Washington the bloc, right? I don't think it was at all in the interests of, I would say this, that it was not really in the best tradition of realpolitik. So it did not take into consideration the sensitivities or concerns of the Russians and the Chinese. It made actually overt statements by inviting Juan Guaido and Tikhanovskaya. It's making a statement that the US is interested in regime change in certain countries in the world, that it regards certain movements as democratic. For example, Juan Guaido would be a so-called democratic movement. But what is democracy? This is a fundamental problem with the summit. So how do you define democracy? Juan Guaido, for example, has a vision that is a kind of a neoliberal, very pro-market vision for Venezuela. Can we say that that is a democratic vision? I don't think so. But yet this individual was invited to the summit on democracies. How it will impact Armenia, I think it was very irresponsible of the Armenian government, especially at this very sensitive time in relations with Russia, to attend this summit. Russia has made clear from day one, before even the participants were known in this summit, they made clear their displeasure with this idea of a summit for democracy. The idea that the Armenian government would accept the invitation to go. And think about this, what geopolitical benefit would Armenia get from participating in this summit? Would the US come in on a white horse and save the day? Would they provide substantial security guarantees to Armenia? Would American troops be there in Stepanakert to defend the Armenian civilians in Artsakh.
If you ask some Armenians, they would say yes.
Well, if you ask some Armenians, they would say yes, Hovik. But the reality is, we are living in the real world.
Of course.
In the real world, this stuff is complete fantasy.
Look, there's another interesting aspect, which is China and Taiwan. I mean, obviously, China is very gung ho about severing relations with countries that establish diplomatic relations with Taiwan itself. And interestingly, this week, Nicaragua officially joined the ex-friends of the Taiwan Club by declaring that there is only one China. I think it happened just during the summit itself, so it was carefully timed by China. But what do you think about China and Armenia's participation in a forum that included Taiwan itself?
I think it's absolutely idiotic. For not only Russian-Armenian relations, but Armenian-Chinese relations, I think it's a really, really stupid move. Because China is a rising power in Eurasia. It has flexed its muscle in Georgia, in Armenia. Armenia would benefit immensely from a strategic partnership with Beijing. And for Armenia to do this, to be endorsing, let's say, the position on Taiwan favored by the American foreign policy elites, I do not think that is a smart move at all on the part of Yerevan. And Yerevan, again, does not gain anything from it. If you are an independent player, if you conceive of yourself as an independent player in the region, you want to do things that enhance your independence. You want to do things that are going to advance your interests as a state. Right, to advance your interests in, let's say, Artsakh or enhancing security in Sunik. Did this summit accomplish any of that? Okay, so sure, we have feel-good statements. How wonderful the Velvet Revolution was, how democratic it was.
Well, let's actually talk about.
How democratic is Armenia today? How democratic is Armenia? I want to know, Hovik, what do you think? Is Armenia truly democratic?
The thing is that Armenia could not easily say no to a summit like this coming from the United States, right? The more important aspect that I didn't see happen is that Armenia did not coordinate with its side of the patrons. For example, it didn't really coordinate. I don't think it coordinated with Russia, saying that we have to go to this, but we don't want this to be an affront to our friendship. Benyamin, what do you think?
Okay, I don't believe that overt rejection of the invitation would be wise from Armenian government, because it also would be strange, because starting from 1991, Armenia itself declared that we are moving towards democracy, liberal reforms, etc., etc. So this is very tricky, and I believe Americans know what they are doing. So if you are invited as a democracy, but you reject the invitation, okay, you may say that I don't want to be involved in some geopolitical games, but it will be overt anti-American step. If you are rejecting without any explanation, it may send a signal that you yourself don't believe that you are a democracy. But the speech of Nikol Pashinyan, I believe it was a quite wrong speech, because instead of sending very clear message that yes, Armenian people choose democracy starting from 1991, and despite many difficulties, we are still moving towards this path of democracy. But in last 14 months, our belief in democracy was shaken because two authoritarian states, and he even didn't mention Turkey and Azerbaijan. He simply could say that two authoritarian states, whose not being a democracy is also confirmed by not inviting them here, they launched the aggression against the small people who, according to all international law, exercise its right for self-determination. But they launched the aggression against this small nation. They violated international law and international humanitarian law. But neither during the war nor 13 months after the war, the democratic world didn't do anything, neither to prevent the war, nor to stop war, and neither to punish the perpetrators of these crimes against humanity and perpetrators of violation against international humanitarian law. And even Pashinyan could hint somehow that we saw that, for example, in several countries, after some presidential elections, the democratic Euro-Atlantic community put a lot of pressure with individual sanctions and country sanctions, without mentioning Belarus, by hinting Belarus. While in our case, the democratic community didn't do anything. While we strongly believe that during the war and after the war, there were much worse violation of human rights, that in those countries, which in last 1 or 1.5 years, the democratic community put sanctions. And this, unfortunately, may send a signal to Armenian people that maybe The words about democracy, human rights, etc., they are simply words, but everything depends on geopolitical interest. But despite all of this, we still believe in concept of democracy, and we still move towards the democracy. This would be the right messaging from Prime Minister Pashinyan. But instead, he again sends his message dividing Armenian history from 1991 to 2018 and 2018 up to now, speaking about that before 2018, Armenia was authoritarian, but then two-time rejected authoritarianism after 2018. And also he sent a very strange message telling that the main challenge for our democracy is military threats or threats to our military security. But it's a very tricky and not very clear message because, okay, what Pashinyan would like to say is that, okay, a country should choose either you have to be a democratic country but vulnerable for military threats or not protected, or you should be strong militarily but not democratic. This is a very strange message.
Interesting, yeah.
Because in any case, we know a lot of countries who perceive themselves as a beacon of liberal democracy or leaders of liberal democracy, and which are also the very powerful nations, starting from United States, United Kingdom in this.
Yeah.
So my understanding is that the main problem was not the participation of itself. So I strongly believe that both Russia and China, in a non-public way, expressed their concerns, at least, that Armenia may participate. But the main problem was not participation itself, but the wrong messages which Pashinyan circulated during the summit.
Interesting. So from a different angle, both of you think that this was in reality a missed opportunity. I thought the whole summit idea was an interesting one that was affording Biden the ability to take back the moral high ground in the world as the leader of the free world after America lost it from Trump. But I also thought it was very strange to have a summit like this on Zoom because so much of the relationship between these leaders is built in the hallways and over dinners and over lunches rather than, looking at each other through a box.
I want to just toss out something else too, that when we talk about this idea of whether Armenia or not should accept the invitation, I think it's actually unfair that the United States even puts Armenia in that position.
Yeah.
It understands
Absolutely.
Armenia is in this part of it's actually not only Armenia, a whole bunch of other countries.
Many small countries.
Are in many small countries in this part of the world, especially in the post-Soviet space, they should not be forced to choose between Russia and the West. They should be able to have the access to the best of both worlds. And that's, I think,
maybe it's the kinder, gentler way of saying you're with us or you're with the enemy.
Well, it is the kinder, gentler way of saying that exactly. I mean, and there is that kind of coercive aspect behind it. That, well, if you don't do this, then, like Benyamin said, then you don't consider yourself a democracy, or you're not with us, or you're not part of our club. I think that it's incredibly unfair that Armenia has to be forced to make that choice. There shouldn't even have been an invitation from the United States to Yerevan. This shouldn't even have happened. As an American, I'm saying this. I don't think that this summit is useful, even from the perspective of American foreign policy.
And also, just small addition, even while summit was summit for democracy, and logically only democratic countries should be invited, but we also saw in the list some countries like Philippines, like Pakistan, who even according to the reports of the State Department and reports to the America-based non-governmental organizations like Freedom House, National Endowment for Democracy, and etc., they are absolutely non-democratic. So even the list itself was a proof that this is not 100% about good intentions and values and etc. It's also about politics. Otherwise, at least
a very
Philippines and
list.
Pakistan should be there. Or let's take
Yeah.
into consideration that they included in the list Poland, but excluded Hungary. While even from the perspective of European Union and European Commission sitting in Brussels, Poland has much more problems with the rule of law and other European values than Hungary. But Poland is invited, Hungary is excluded.
Yeah.
So even the list itself, clear manifestations that here we are not speaking about only democracy or values. And also, for example, from civil society sectors, they invited the incumbent and former president of World Uyghur Congress. While this is a congress which supports the so-called establishment of independent Eastern Turkestan and to support separatism and also some terrorist actions in China. And this is also put Armenia, by the way, in a very strange position. Right. Because we all know that Uyghurs is a part of this pan-Turkism movement. We all know that thousands of Uyghurs were brought by Turkey to Syria as mercenaries. And we don't know, but most probably, some Uyghurs also fought against Armenians in Karabakh in 2020. So it's theoretically very strange.
And also Benyamin too, also even Pakistan, because Pakistan doesn't even recognize Armenia as a state.
Yes, I fully agree that by including Armenia in the list, the US put Armenia in a very tricky position, because rejecting this, it will be overt anti-American step, and also it will be step by declaring yourself non-democratic. But simultaneously, participating automatically means that you, at least China and Russia, may perceive that you are acting against the interest. But again, the key problem was that even if Armenia was forced to participate or had no other choice than to participate, the messages of Prime Minister directly targeted against Turkey and Azerbaijan, and not to speak general threats or.
You could do it more diplomatically, I guess.
Yeah, and also one more. I want to throw out one more thing. Another factor we haven't been talking about is Iran. Iran also is important in this equation as well too.
Yeah. Well, at least, in his minute-long speech, he did mention low emissions and green economy, so we can be happy for that. Okay, domestic politics. The municipal elections on December 5 occurred, and they were in 36 communities across 9 of Armenia's 12 marzes, including Aragatson, Ararat, Armavir, Gegarkunik, Lori, Kotayk, Shirak, Bayostzor, and Tavush. This was the largest municipal elections this year, and thus gathered the most focus. But there were also 2 smaller scale elections in October and November, which we covered. The results themselves, well, it's unclear. But even at the expert level, we think it's impossible to make heads or tails. They've been spun by different parties in different ways. For instance, the pro-government media celebrated the results as a huge victory for the ruling party, with civil contract winning outright in 24 out of 36 communities. The opposition claims that the margin of victories of the ruling party is decreasing, and that the ruling party didn't win in some of the larger and more critical battles. And perhaps it even makes sense to drill down into each community by community results. But that's probably a topic for a separate show, and there's adequate coverage in the Armenian media. What we're interested in is the overall trend and the results at the sort of meta level. Pietro, have you been following the elections? What are your impressions so far?
My impression is that overall, I think Pashinyan's popular standing is decreasing. I think slowly but surely. It is not as strong as it once was. I mean, obviously in Yerevan, certainly that's the case, but even in the regions now, I think that slowly but surely his, popular mandate, certainly it wasn't where it was in 2018. And I think the legacy of the wars is catching up with him.
I mostly will agree with Pietro, but there was also a very interesting feature that we see that some small parties, which are out of parliament and which are pro-Western, they also secured quite interesting positive results. I'm speaking about Republic Party, run by former Prime Minister Aram Sarkisyan, the brother of Vazgen Sarkisyan. Also, the newly established Rally for Republic Party, the leader which is Arman Babajanyan, former member of parliament, and even the party of Samvel Babayan, so-called Liberal Party. So 3 of these parties, they in several places, they secured some interesting and positive results, and they all are, they say, pro-Western and anti-Russian. I'm not sure, is it some agreements between Pashinyan and them that somehow they have been supported or etc. But the fact is fact that, for example, I didn't expect that, for example, the Rally for Republic or the party established by Samvel Babayan or the party of Vazgen Sarkisyan's brother Aram Sarkisyan could gain these type of results outside from certain region, because yes, we all know that Aram Sarkisyan and the Vazgen Sarkisyan family still is quite influential in Arad province. But for example, his party also gained quite impressive results in some communities outside of Arad province. The same is for 2 other parties.
Yeah, that was like Megri, right? In the previous elections.
Another interesting feature is that the party which is supported, at least financially, by Ruben Vartanyan, the so-called Country for Living, and is led by former social affairs minister Manet Tandilian, they also gained quite interesting results. Yes, in some communities, they didn't pass the 5% threshold, but in any case, almost in all communities, when they participated, they received at least 4%. And this is interesting because the party was established like only several months ago, but now they sent a message that, only within several months, they are able in different communities, in different regions, to secure at least minimum 4%. And in some communities, they secured more. For example, in community of Parakar, which is very close to Yerevan near the Zvartnots airport. They even secured some 49%, and only 1% did prevent them from gaining outright majority and becoming the leader of community. So also, this is very interesting that the small pro-Western parties led by Aram Sargsyan, Samvel Babayan, and also Arman Babajanyan, they achieved quite positive result. And also Ruben Vartanyan is clearly sending messages that he can be a quite influential force in any upcoming parliamentary elections. Will they be the scheduled ones in 2026 or even early ones?
So at the same time, where was the national opposition, the parliamentary one? What was really weird about these elections is that the opposition at the national level, specifically Hayastan Dashing and Bativunen Dashing, did not participate, heavily, and also did not participate in the blocks in the same election blocks as in the national level. For instance, the ARF participated in only some municipalities, and even then, there were some where it participated as part of different alliances. And in the elections that it did take part in, the ARF didn't score at the top at all. So at best, it was, it achieved some victories as part of a different alliance. And the Hana Petakans as well, the Republican Party, didn't officially participate, but individual politicians who are members of the party participated in their different electoral blocks. And as you said, some of them were under this first name, last name electoral blocks. What's your thought about this strategy by the parliamentary opposition? What is the deal with these first name, last name electoral blocks?
Very shortly, my
Benyamin
understanding
and Pietro,
is that
whoever wants to chime in.
At least the leaders of opposition, if we consider leaders the second and third president of Armenia, maybe they understood also based on the June 2021 elections that until now they perceived very negatively and significant majority of population based on real or perceived understanding still believes that they are at least that Pashinyan is less evil than they themselves. That is why maybe they decided not to directly be involved. And in no local or elections, we see directly participation of either Robert Kochayan or Sargsyan. Their names were not circulated. For example, even the Armenia Alliance, only IRF participated without big success. And the second party, which is part of Alliance, is mainly Sunni-based parties, is Rebirth Armenia. It also didn't participate. And my understanding is that this party has very few supporters outside the Sunni province. This is a mainly like local Sunni province party, and it's not the case that they have 100% support even in Sunni province. Because, for example, in Kapan, the mayor established with Ishkhan Zakharyan, this guy who was arrested back in 2013, also a very anti-Russian Russian guy, by the way, who almost on weekly basis criticizes President Putin, telling that Russia and Putin wants to destroy Armenia and commit second genocide. And even in Kapan, the alliance which won the elections, led by the incumbent mayor, was named by the party of this guy, like Shant Alliance. So
Shant Dashing, yeah. That was also in the I think November elections and not in the current. But yeah, that's it's very interesting.
Interestingly, we see that from one point of view, if there are no personal participation of Robert Kochayan, this significantly diminishes the voices for Nikol Pashinyan, because a lot of people they say, if there is no Kochayan, well, we should vote for Pashinyan, especially in the 6 months after June 2021 elections. Pashinyan was not able to implement any promises. He spoke about peace with Azerbaijan and Turkey, about restoration of communications, economic growth. But people now see that there is no peace. Almost on daily basis, we see more killings of our soldiers. No one knows when these communications will be opened or will be opened. So from one point of view, the not participation of Kochayan diminishes the votes of Nikol Pashinyan.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree.
Kochayan also somehow diminishes the votes for Armenia Alliance or for the parties comprised of Armenia Alliance. And here, interestingly, overt anti-Russian parties gained some result, because again, Arman Babajanyan, Aram Sargsyan, and also
Aram Zaveni Sargsyan,
and also Shant Harutyunyan, these three are very critical. They are against Russia. And Samvel Babayan also, sometimes he criticizing Russia, sometimes no. So it's interesting that if there is no Kochayan, it means less vote for Pashinyan, but more vote for anti-Russian forces.
Pashinyan, despite, I guess, not performing as expected, says that democracy won. But we also see there are plenty of violations reported, including sort of allegations of electoral day fraud, There were some leaks of videos where, of abuse of administrative resources. Specifically, we were seeing roller drums, on asphalt, laying asphalt on elections day in December amid rain and mud. However, the Independent Observer election monitoring organization run by Daniel Ioannisian has declared that the elections were free and fair. So Pietro, what do you make of this? Could you, remind our listeners, maybe even to begin with, who Daniel Ioannisian is?
Well, Ioannisian, he's not objective. I can just tell you that right off the bat. I mean, the guy would not be somebody to tell you what is a free and fair election, especially if Pashinyan, he's echoing the Pashinyan conclusion. And so I don't think you can depend on him as a reliable or independent source. You could say, in a way, democracy won in the sense that it indicated the pulse of the population that Pashinyan's position is gradually declining. That's not as strong as it once was. But the efforts by the Pashinyan government to obstruct democracy are absolutely not democratic. But they are consistent with Pashinyan's general anti-democratic moves, that he has done throughout his tenure, going back several years. But I think going to the earlier question about, the outcomes of the election, I think also if we look at the critical voices against Russia who gained in this election, this is also the result of the outcome of the Artsakh war, in the sense that there are many Armenians in the society who, whether you agree or not, believe that Russia could have done more, and still believe that Russia can do more. They might be critical that Pashinyan, of course, caused everything, that Pashinyan has been a disaster. But they would also say, Russia could do more to help us out. Now, a lot of Russian officials would say, well, it's on you, Armenia, to, do your own thing and to defend yourself and advance your national interests. I mean, you elected Pashinyan. Yeah. But many people would say, well, Russia, you have a role to play as well, too, and you should be doing more. So this is another factor that explains why we see a bump for these kind of groups, that this is part of that reaction.
There was also an instance of harassment where there were three major parties in one of the communities running, and none of them won the majority, including civil contract. So the two opposing parties had an opportunity to form an alliance or a faction, I guess, and coalition. But right following the election results being published, one of the members of the opposition parties got arrested. And, we don't see too many of these instances reported.
If I'm not mistaken, this was in Vardenis.
Yeah, Vardenis, exactly.
They arrested the number one of one of these opposition groups. So they arrested
the top, vote getter.
The potential mayor, because if coalition formed, this guy could become a mayor.
Hey, Daniel Ioannisian, if you're listening to this, pay attention. All right, so, and lastly, there was results from MPG this week that also indicated declining popularity of the popular government. We don't have time to talk about this, but we'll provide a link to those results in our notes, and maybe we can refer to it in a future episode.
Yeah, I think the most important thing I noted in that is if you look at the top level poll results, they were showing that the overall satisfaction of the population and the overall view of the economy have gone to lower than they used to be before 2018.
Of course.
Right.
I also would toss out something else about the anti-Russian attitudes, that in part that is, you could make the case that is encouraged, actually not just make the case, it's objectively observable that the government itself is encouraging such sentiments because it wants to deflect responsibility away from its inaction and its inadequacy. So there's also that factor.
We covered that, in fact, last week when Alen Simonian made these statements against Russia wanted to sell Artsakh. The Russian foreign minister responded to that, and in fact, this week there was a leak about that of Lavrov himself, saying how sort of unprofessional it is to talk about that. And obviously, we've talked about Russia's role in the war, but let's go to the next topic because we have a lot to talk about: the opposition parliamentarians. So going back to the opposition, the Constitutional Court this week found the detention of 3 Hayastan Alliance MPs as anti-constitutional. They were all released. I think this is another setback for the government in the High Court, and essentially confirms that what the opposition was claiming, that the justice system, which finally corrected itself, but is essentially rigged against the opposition and compliant with the wishes of the party in power. In all stages of the process, starting from the ordinary prosecutor, the chief prosecutor of law enforcement, and the judiciary sided with the government in an apparent attempt to put pressure on the opposition. The opposition parliamentarians, again, finally were released, and we're happy about that. But this means that the government essentially enjoys the ability to put pressure on its enemies, sending them to jail for months at a time without major deterrence. Benyamin, can you comment on what's the implication of this constitutional court decision, on the government itself? Is it just sort of a, bad PR or some other developments in the future?
Okay, I don't think that this will have some critical impact on government. At the end of the day, government itself changed the setting of constitutional court back in June 2020. By the way, there was a way which at that time perceived by many, also many lawyers, as an unconstitutional. We remember that Pashinyan sought to organize a referendum to change the constitution, which was scheduled in April 2020. Then this COVID-19 started. And then he decided that, okay, I'm going to change the constitution through parliament, but he didn't ask the constitutional court, which itself was anti-constitutional. But at the end of the day, he managed to kick out 3 members of constitutional court and bring the 3 members, which presumably should be loyal for him, because when they were elected, the My Step coalition at that time enjoyed even constitutional majority. So I'm not in a position to say that constitutional court is acting fully against Pashinyan, but one thing is clear, that if we compare constitutional court with, for example, a prosecutor office or law enforcement bodies, there at least constitutional court is not under direct Pashinyan's control, because according to our constitution, elaborated by Sir Sargsyan and confirmed in a very tricky referendum back in December 2015, the Prime Minister personally controls police, and Prime Minister personally controls National Security Service, and through Ministry of Justice, Prime Minister also indirectly may control the courts and judges through this High Justice Council story. So if we compare the influence of Prime Minister on prosecutor office, on investigative committee and or constitutional court, definitely Prime Minister has much less influence on constitutional court, even if he himself changed the composition of constitutional courts through, let's say, at least semi-legal moves back in June 2020. But to say that, okay, this will critically weaken Pashinyan's government, or this may somehow be a harbinger of the demise of his government, I don't think it's so. But frankly speaking, obviously it was a nonsense that these MPs being elected, they still were kept in jail without getting parliament permission. Even for non-lawyers and non-legal experts, it was obvious that something is wrong here. Why Pashinyan continued all this, I'm not sure. Maybe personally he was insulted. We all remember when he visited, finally he was able to visit Syunik in April 2021, because he first tried to do it in December 2020 or at the beginning of 2021 and failed, only reached Sisyan. Then he, by gathering huge amount of riot police and etc., finally managed to go to Syunik, but was get publicly insulted. Maybe he decided simply to make revenge and put this guy as long in the prison as possible as a personal revenge. This is my perception.
Yeah. And even in our much more autocratic neighbor Turkey, I believe this, right? Parliamentary immunity is very strongly observed, and at least that was through my layperson eyes. But in other news, just quickly to close off this topic, Ishkhan Zakharyan, who is a member of the Pativ Unem faction, announced that he's quitting. We had reported this earlier, but this is now official. But he said he will continue serving as an independent lawmaker, although in the opposition camp. Earlier in November, it was reported that the government had opened a criminal case against Ishkhan. So this seems to be another instance of putting pressure on individual MPs. Opposition sources essentially allege that opening the criminal case is illegal, since Zakharyan also enjoys parliamentary immunity, and apparently what the offense he's accused of may have happened after. We're not here to defend Zakharyan. Obviously, there's he may have some checkered past, but why didn't Zakharyan simply lay down his mandate, Pietro? That would allow the opposition faction to choose another member of their choice. Or why did even the opposition put him on the list of candidates in the first place? I mean, this is remarkable that they would put someone so vulnerable in this position. And also, lastly, what is the implication of the opposition having one less vote? Does this mean that the ruling party would have essentially a constitutional supermajority in parliament?
I think they have to get better oppositional MPs. I mean, if you have an MP who's acting like this, I don't think that that's going to help them, so to speak. They need all the votes that they can get. They need all the support that they can get. They need all the strength that they can get, because it's absolutely critical at this time. This government is running the country into the ground. So to have a parliamentarian act like this, I think is just ridiculous. But that's just my opinion on.
Yeah.
Key problem here even is not that government is trying to put the pressure on opposition MPs. The key problem here is the move by, I have the Honor Alliance, or by Republican Party, or maybe the third president itself, to include Mr. Zakharyan into his party list and bring him the parliament, when everyone knows, back starting from Robert Kocharian time, that Ishkhan Zakharyan had some huge problems with his law, and this is not a secret.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
That at any moment when law enforcement bodies would like, they would pressure, they at least will be able to put pressure on Mr. Zakharyan. This was clear, and definitely the third president knows much better about this than anyone else, because he was a president. So why he decided to bring the guy whom he knows better than anyone else can be blackmailed because of his illegal activities? Okay, I'm not sure, but again, this is very, very strange.
And also, and especially because this is so critical, why would you bring such a person like this into your, opposition? It's ridiculous.
Okay, moving on. The local news in Armenia was consumed again this week by a political scandal. And again, it was Alen Simonyan who was in the news. In a leaked video which appeared on the internet on December 8th, Simonyan is seen as making some eyebrow-raising remarks regarding Armenian prisoners held in Baku. He insinuates that, at least in the case of November 16th mini-war, reminder we had about 32 POWs taken that day, the prisoners voluntarily turned themselves in and are guilty of desertion. He also made a statement that for him, these prisoners no longer exist, if it means that we would lose Sunik or Kapan. Simonyan responded that the leaked video was edited and quoted him out of context, and he provided a full version of the same video, which still confirmed that what the leaked video had shown. His lack of empathy or respect for Armenian soldiers, for veterans, for POWs, it was clear in either version of that video. And the discussion but it's important to note that the discussion on whether Armenian POWs were guilty of desertion was suddenly introduced into the Armenian political language by Pashinyan himself on November 18th in Parliament, when he said, to quote, "I think it's time for us to investigate every case of captivity properly, because every soldier serving in the armed forces of the Republic of Armenia has responsibilities. Perhaps we have been wrong in this case because of the emotional background, but all cases must be clearly examined. What does it mean to be taken prisoner?" Pashinyan questioned. "And under what circumstances?" Pashinyan continued. And also, just to mention, the following day of these public statements by Alen Simonyan, an actual criminal case was opened against 5 of the 10 prisoners that were returned to Armenia on December 4th. So Pashinyan and Simonyan's statements essentially drew also widespread condemnation from human rights groups. Benyamin, maybe coming back to you, could Armenia have handled this issue better, even if we assume that some of the prisoners were in fact deserters?
Look, the fact that after any such case, when your soldier is being caught as a captive, the criminal investigation should be opened. This is a clear fact. This is not a new thing, and I'm not sure why Pashinyan declared it, because this is automatic demand that if soldier have been killed or soldier have been captive, there should be the criminal investigation. So nothing new here, and I'm not sure why Pashinyan decided to speak about this like a bombshell. Like, okay, nothing happened before that, and now he decided criminal investigation should be opened. Of course, criminal investigation should be opened, but it does not mean that criminal investigation should be opened. This does not mean that automatically the soldiers are criminals. Criminal investigation.
And in fact, just to supplement what I said, 5 of the 10 prisoners, they actually wanted to arrest them, even though the judge, at least in the lower instance, denied the request for the arrest, and now they're appealing. But not only did they open the criminal case, they actually sought to arrest 5 of the 10 people.
Because from my understanding, if soldiers are being caught as a captive, or they are becoming a captive or POWs, this is not only the issue of the soldiers, but a lot of other issues, starting from what happened immediately before the attack, What about military intelligence? What about officers and a lot of other things, which should be done through criminal investigation. But at the more broad level, my understanding is that Pashinyan and his team understands that Azerbaijan is not going to return any more POWs, or most likely he will not return all POWs. And they understand that this can be used against them, like telling them, okay, you signed this statement of November 10, 2020, 13 or 14 months have passed, but you are not able even to secure the basic provisions of this statement to bring Armenian POWs back, or all Armenian POWs back. So I believe they will start somehow to discredit some of these POWs, so that when some of them still will be in Azerbaijani jails for several years, and when someone will ask, okay, why you are not making any efforts, or why you are not making successful efforts to bring these guys back, they will say, look, they are criminals, they are traitors, so let's not speak about them. Maybe they deserve to be killed in Azerbaijani jails. This is my understanding, that they will try to dehumanize at least part of POWs, because they understand that Azerbaijan is not going to return all of them. So they are simply securing themselves for future criticizing, simply disseminating these ideas that some of the POWs were traitors, criminals, so state should not spend any resources to bring them back, and they deserve their current fate. At least this is my reading situation.
Well, I just also want to toss out something else too. I mean, I can't help but make the connection here that that's kind of a very kind of something you would see out of the playbook of Beria or Mogdusi, somebody from the NKVD, that, you know, we should consider our POWs to be criminals, this sort of a thing. And I think that that's absolutely beyond the pale. I mean, especially because these are the Armenian heroes. These are people who are fighting. And by the way, they didn't get the support from this government, you know, basically left them out there. The government put them in that position, and they were the ones who were fighting. They were more patriotic than this government. So for them to call, so for Pashinyan to call them criminals, it's obscene. It's absolutely obscene.
Pietro.
And also what Benyamin said, and this is another, this kind of goes into like, I guess you could say a rant, that Azerbaijan has been holding the POWs 13 or 14 months. It's over a year. Think about that. And Armenia, you know, they went along with the terms of the November statement. They gave away critical territories that linked Armenia with Artsakh, like Kelbajar and Lachin. They did everything that was expected of them. And Azerbaijan has not been adhering to the agreement. And yet, you know, they're just rolling over.
Pietro, also, like, not even all the prisoners were targeted. So at least Alen Simonian seems to be generalizing when he says that all those prisoners were traitors. But in fact, Sidanur Sahakyan, a prominent human rights lawyer, warned she had to stop what she was doing in fighting Azerbaijan in courts to warn Pashinyan that such public statements and public prosecution could be used by Azerbaijan to convince the prisoners not to return to Armenia, even if they're not guilty. You know, these prisoners were being tortured or put pressure on daily. Could be, you know, convinced that, hey, you know, if you go to Armenia, you're going to be tried as a traitor. Also, you know, there were some reports that Armenian soldiers were under orders not to shoot. So why then not allow for the presumption of innocence? Why accuse the prisoners publicly as a high-ranking official, which also could be deemed as putting pressure on investigators? You know, why do that publicly, and why generalize when the criminal case was only opened against some of them?
Is further evidence, Hovik, of the exceptional incompetence of this government, the exceptional idiocy of this government. And specifically, I want to highlight, and this kind of is almost on the level of a rant, Alen Simonian, a person who should have resigned long ago from the Armenian government, right? This Simonian is irresponsible, reckless. He is like an absolute fool, and he is as incompetent as they come.
Right.
And
right.
to allow a man like this to stay in the government is beyond the pale. I mean, he should resign. I mean, he should have resigned a long time ago. But the statements he makes, it's like I've never seen a circus. I mean, this is just beyond idiot.
I want to remind our listeners about the point where when he released the statement saying that he was quoted out of context, he released the same video, a longer version. There are some in the opposition that say this was actually set up by the government. We don't want to go into conspiracy theories, but, you know, how does he get access to the same video that was leaked, a longer version, when if it was someone else recording him. But anyway, and I know we're running out of time, but I also want to mention this because this is what Benyamin talked about. In the November 16th mini war videos, and I've seen some military analysts talk about this, the Azeri soldiers seem to be like waltzing into Armenian territory, like there's no concern. They have no concern. And why not mine the hell out of that place so that they're a little bit more constrained in how they operate? That's a big question that to me needs to be asked in all of this. Were there any failures prior to this that allowed the Azerbaijanis to have easier time capturing those soldiers?
In the case of some of these soldiers who have so-called deserted, one needs to answer under the circumstances. Did they desert this government, or did they desert their positions defending the country? Because this government has not had any empathy or...
I think I want to say something else, but I think that the reality is that the government deserted them. And the government deserted the country. And the government deserted Artsakh. This is what really, if we're talking about desertion, we're talking about dereliction of duty.
Yeah.
Right? This government should not be in power at all.
Let's move on to regional politics. So today in Liverpool, we're recording this show on December the 12th. Today in Liverpool, the G7 issued a sharp warning to Moscow that there will be massive consequences if it invades or commits aggression against Ukraine. The UK's Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss, warned that all economic sanctions were on the table. The group also praised Ukraine's restraint and reaffirmed its unwavering commitment to Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, as well as the right of any sovereign state to determine its own future, which presumably includes membership in NATO. For its part, Moscow denies that it intends to invade Ukraine and says that the West is gripped by Russophobia. How will these rising tensions between Russia and the US over Ukraine impact the Caucasus and Armenia's position in the region?
I don't think it will impact the position well. In other words, what happens in Ukraine is part of a broader effort. So first of all, we should not think of this as an issue between Russia and Ukraine, or the West just simply taking Ukraine's side in a argument between Russia and Ukraine. This is the West using the country of Ukraine and the Ukrainian people politically against Russia, just as it has with Georgia and many other peoples and countries in the post-Soviet space. But Ukraine is is at the center of this effort to kind of contain Russia in the post-Soviet space. So this tension that we see in Ukraine, this rising war rhetoric between Washington and Moscow, and the fact that the foreign policy elite in Washington has completely disregarded, in Vladimir Putin's words, all of Moscow's red lines and just keeps on pushing. I don't think it will lead to anything good for Armenia or for the Caucasus or for the post-Soviet space in general. Now, there was earlier this week a kind of an summit, if you will, a video call, high-stakes video call between President Biden and President Putin. The New York Times, they said that this was a meeting that was tense and occasionally punctured by humor. But overall, the big takeaway point was that it was tense. And you had President saying that it would lead to harsh economic penalties on Russia, that it would lead NATO to reposition its troops in Europe. This sort of, elevating the rhetoric, elevating the stakes. And also, by doing this, first of all, the Ukrainians are the ones who are going to suffer. They're on the front line. They're right there on the front line, on the border there with Russia. Keep in mind also the longstanding cultural, historical, ethnic ties, familial ties between Russians and Ukrainians, how painful this is for Russians and Ukrainians. But not only, think about the implications for Western Europe. If there is a war in Europe, right, we could be sleepwalking into a war right now. We've heard about this in the context of World War I, right? And apparently we haven't learned our history lessons. And yet, who is going to be most devastated by this? The United States is far away. There's a whole Atlantic Ocean separating America from Europe. The European countries, Western Europe, France, Germany, Spain, Italy, UK, all these countries, they're the ones who are right there on the front line, right? Scandinavia is right there. Finland is right there.
The Caucasus.
Imagine, and the Caucasus is right there. The Caucasus is absolutely right there. And that's why I'm always saying about Turkey. I mean, Turkey, they are in many ways, even though Biden doesn't invite them to the democracy summits and, there's some kind of public tit for tat, Turkey effectively, through its actions in Artsakh, is acting at the behest of the American War Party. It's pushing to get into Central Asia, to get through those energy links, to undermine Russia's security position in Central Asia, in the Caucasus, and in Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
So it's very, very dangerous.
Benjamin, you and I have had a mini discussion online about this very topic, that the NATO PR that is emanating this war rhetoric about a discourse of the Ukraine invasion being imminent is fictitious. In reality, Russia has been very dovish in many ways. I mean, if we look at the example of their process in the South Caucasus, they've done everything they can do to avoid a violent or war scenario between themselves and Azerbaijan, or between themselves and Turkey, which is a NATO member, right? Of course. What do you think is going on with this discourse?
Okay, I don't see any rational or even irrational reason why Russia should start war against Ukraine. Because if Russia starts war against Ukraine, three things will happen definitely. All European countries who, at least now, they are trying to keep some balance between Russia and United States, they will be rallied behind United States in US anti-Russian rhetoric. Definitely, Russia will forget about Nord Stream 2. And given that 10 billion euros have been spent and the pipeline is constructed, this is not the good idea. This will be the second outcome. And the third outcome will be much severe economic sanctions against Russia. But what will be the benefits? I don't think. Okay, let's assume Russia could take some more territories, for example, Kharkiv, or even reach Odessa, or open land bridge to Crimea. But then what? Okay, definitely part of the populations will against it. So it will be another Iraq, like Iraq was for United States, or even the mix of Iraq and Afghanistan. So why Russia should do this move? No idea. But from American perspective, I strongly believe that United States has some reasons to somehow force or convince Ukraine to start provocation and escalation. Why? Because first, this will allow to finally ruin the Minsk agreements, because now Ukraine is telling that I'm not going to implement Minsk agreements because they are anti-Ukrainian, and Russia forced President Poroshenko to sign them. But Russia is telling, look, guys, you signed this. France and Germany are guarantors, and even UN Security Council resolution guarantees Minsk agreements. So you cannot simply not implement them. But if there will be another large-scale war, it will allow both Ukraine and United States to say that, sorry, guys, but the Minsk agreements were relevant in the previous status quo. We have war, we have new status quo, so we should forget about Minsk agreements. This is first. Second, United States may directly be involved in negotiation process, because currently there is a Normandy format, Russia, Ukraine, France, Germany, no direct involvement and participation of US. And in this Normandy format, Russia is not side of the conflict. Russia officially is not side of the conflict. But if there will be large-scale war, definitely Russia will be side of the conflict, and the United States will be directly involved in negotiation process. So either it will be Normandy 5 or maybe Normandy 3, like only United States, Russia, and Ukraine. And third, United States will force these primary or key or main European countries, especially France and Germany, first to be more anti-Russian, and second to be more pro-US, and third to forget about so-called Europe strategic autonomy. Because United States will say, look, you have reckless, irrational Russia, so you definitely will need for decades to come American protection, American military protection, American nuclear umbrella. So forget about any strategic autonomy of Europe, and please keep your place as our junior allies. Otherwise, Russian troops now, they are reaching Kharkiv, but someday maybe they will try to reach Warsaw or even Paris. So there is a logic behind United States to convince or force Ukrainians to start the provocation and even large-scale escalation. But I don't see logic from Russian point of view to start it.
Benjamin, on this topic, have you seen anything to the contrary, that it is Ukraine that is provoking here? Because the statement praising Ukraine for its restraint seemed very weird.
As far as I understand, even Ukraine itself or part of Ukraine government is not happy to become a cannon fodder in this game.
Yeah.
Because, for example, in mid-November, we heard statements from US Department of Defense said there are a lot of Russian forces concentrating along Ukraine border and invasion is imminent. But then the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense stated that no, guys, there are no concentration of Russian troops. and there are no base to speak about imminent Russian invasion because Russian statements are very clear. And Russia clearly told both the Ukraine and the United States that if under the US pressure, Ukraine will start large-scale provocation, in that case, Russia will give a very tough blow to Ukraine. And even Russian experts are speaking that in this case, if despite all our warnings, Ukraine will start large-scale war, we will do everything to deprive Ukraine from its statehood. They are telling that this will put into doubt the Ukrainian statehood itself.
Right. And also the idea of Ukraine showing restraint is completely ridiculous because we've seen not only the provocations, but even we've talked previously on this show about Turkey supporting Ukraine's provocations, about Erdogan selling Bayraktars to Zelensky, training Ukrainian troops, etc. So this is complete, hogwash that they are restrained, so to speak.
All right, Sochi to Brussels via ultimatums. So after the meeting in Sochi on November 26th, the sides made various statements that they had agreed to advance various points in the November 2020 agreement, and they gave a timeline of about 10 days. Ilham Aliyev then demanded that Armenia provide a date for opening what he calls the Zangezur corridor, to which the Armenian government responded that corridor logic was not part of the agreement, a repeated sort of statement by the Armenian side. The statements were swiftly followed by another, it seems, a mini war in which the Azerbaijani army fired on positions in Gegarkunik. So this time in the Gegarkunik region and specifically Verin Shoja. The results after a day or two of violence include 1 dead, 8 injured, with 6 in serious condition. There is no reports of new positions being taken by Azerbaijan. But my question, I guess, is we've already talked about Azerbaijan's strategy to make life in Artsakh and the borders of Armenia very miserable for Armenians. And what astounds us is essentially the deep military unreadiness or non-readiness of Armenia to, at least publicly, to put so much pain on Azerbaijan that they stop doing this.
I would even go so far as to say it's passivity. I mean, they're not.
Yeah.
They're not. It's not. It's like not even a matter of they're willing to fight, but they're unready. They're not even willing
There's
to
no
fight.
response from Armenia.
I mean, there's no response from Armenia, and I mean, and especially this is why when you have the kind of rhetoric that maybe Russia should be doing the heavy lifting for us, or Iran should be doing the heavy lifting for us, that they should be defending us and protecting us, and we're so helpless. Well, no, not really. I mean, you have a responsibility. You have a state. Yerevan is the capital of the Republic of Armenia, and the Republic of Armenia has borders, and those borders need to be defended. It's not hard. It's an equation that is very easy. And the fact that
especially we've had a year to prepare for this.
Yeah. And the fact that Pashinyan cannot put 2 and 2 together, I mean, that's just a testament to his incompetence. You have now Iran and Russia slowly but surely kind of coming together in the region. Just today, or just recently, the Iranians announced that they're close to forming a 20-year cooperation agreement with the Russians. So there is a trend toward greater cooperation between Moscow and Tehran, that north-south kind of corridor, and Armenia has, it's just not there. It can't even defend its own borders. That's the most ridiculous thing.
I want to ask Benyamin because he's been, out of our group, he's probably has the most experience doing security, analyzing security affairs. Is this impression that Armenia is very weak and passive incorrect on my side, or sort of what counterproof is there to that?
Okay, my understanding is that problem is that in any case, army is a quite complex organism or complex system. And in the last 13 months, 13 months after the end of the war, this complex system has several changes of his leadership. First, Tonoyan was fired. Then in July, Mr. Shakarian was fired or removed. Artsakh Karapetyan came. Then in mid-November, Artsakh Karapetyan itself was fired. And we are speaking only about ministers of defense. We see the chief of general staff was forced to resign or fired at the end of February, beginning of March. Then the several high-level officials, including the first deputy chief of staff, was arrested. The former minister of defense, Mr. Tonoyan, is arrested. From the basic logic tells us that any complex system if it will undergo through such a shaking from one side to another side, this simply will significantly and negatively impact its efficiency and effectiveness. So my understanding is that, okay, instead of organizing all this shake-up in the army and bringing some people with zero experience neither in military nor in governing huge complex systems, it will be the right step to put much effort and attention on modernizing and increasing the army's capabilities. Unfortunately, in last 13 months, starting from November 10, 2020, I don't see any action, even a single action, to increase even by 1 inch the capacities and capabilities of Armenian army. Instead of that, we see the change of leadership, we see criminal cases, and we see the blame game that, okay, it was army was responsible because we lost Karabakh and etc., etc. All this simply cannot have any positive impact on army. So again, I'm not in a position to say now, I mean, today is, in the fact of today, December 12, 2021, are our armed forces ready, or are they capable of defending or moving back or pushing back Azerbaijani attacks? But one thing is clear, the government has done nothing in the last 13 months to make Armenian army capable of doing that.
In fact, actually, I would even go further. I mean, what you've described, Benyamin, I mean, they're actively undermining the capability of the army to do anything.
And I have not heard anything about the reforms.
Yes, so we have heard only some ideas that some reforms have been launched, but no one has basic idea reforms have been launched for what. Because first of all, you should have strategy, at least you should have destination, that I want to reach point B from point A. And then elaborate some reforms to pass this journey in more efficient way, quicker, and etc. No one knows the destination. The reforms are being launched for what? What kind of army we want? No one knows that. At least no one is telling that. And no one knows what are the reforms for this unknown destination.
You know, after the November statement was signed, there were many voices who were saying things like Armenia should develop its own drone program, or Armenia is in the process of creating its own Bayraktars, this kind of a thing. I mean, it's like a huge joke. The fact that nobody's even talking about that anymore. I mean, this government has absolutely undermined the country's defense capabilities, 100%.
In the background of all these skirmishes and the attrition of soldiers dying and being injured, there's the preparation for the Pashinyan and Aliyev meeting in Brussels coming this week on the 15th. The OSCE MG countries made an announcement by their foreign ministers, which is a little higher level than just the co-chairs. But what was missing in this statement was any kind of a praise, the usual praise that they put on the Russian peacekeepers. And there was no mention of the Artsakh status and the former basic principles, non-use of force, self-determination, territorial integrity. All these things seem to have subsided. The statement shows more about the deep divide between Russia and the West. Is there anything we can glean about the Brussels meeting from this? What is the agenda? And what can we expect from this, except for maybe everybody having Belgian waffles?
Oh, well, I think such a summit as this is not, I mean, it's just going to be another kind of pawn in this game between Russia and the West. And that the objective might be to kind of bring Armenia and Azerbaijan together without Russia, to kind of exclude Russia from this peace process. But as we know, this is almost completely impossible because Russia is intimately tied in with the region. And no matter what Pashinyan and his associates in the government, like our friend Mr. Simonian, think, Russia is not going anywhere, and Russia is the main security guarantor of the existence of both the Armenian state and also the Armenians in Artsakh, by the way, but also the existence of the Armenian people in the Caucasus region.
Okay, I may only say that Russia will continue to be a #1 player in the region for decades to come. I'm not in a position to say what will be, for example, after 2050, but I'm not sure that this is interested for our audience to go deep into the future, but at least for coming decades, 20 years minimum, Russia will be the top player. And if Armenia does not want to become a client state of Turkey in best case scenario, or even lose its statehood, it will be a foolish thing to make some geopolitical games either with Americans or with Turks against Russia. This will benefit maybe everyone, but this will only put huge damage on Armenia. But regarding the Brussels meeting, I don't believe that in the Brussels meeting there will be huge breakthrough. For example, regarding the process of delimitation and demarcation, the process of restoration of communications, I don't believe that if after more than 3 hours closed door negotiation with Mr. Putin, Mr. Pashinyan and Aliyev will be ready to find solution to these very sensitive issues with some negotiation with Mr. Charles Michel. As a best case scenario, we'll have some more prisoner of wars released either immediately before, during, or immediately after the meeting, and maybe some additional maps will be returned to Azerbaijan. Of course, you have any maps, because now Azerbaijanis are telling that Armenia gave them all maps. So even I'm not sure what we are going to give now for bringing at least some of our POVs back, because unfortunately, this was another diplomatic failure of Armenian government. We allowed Azerbaijan to bring this maps issue into the agenda, and now even international community and the Minsk group co-chairs, they are speaking about humanitarian issues, or when they are speaking about humanitarian issues, they are mentioning in equal terms POVs and landmine maps. POVs and landmine maps. So unfortunately, we allowed Azerbaijan, and we accepted this Azerbaijan offer to start the trade. Like, okay, give us some people, we'll give you some maps, which was definitely inacceptable, because on November 10, 2020 statement, there was even no single word about any maps.
They've done an excellent job of controlling the discourse on this. When there was, like you said, absolutely no mention of anything about mind maps in the major agreement. And let me just say, I've seen some facetious comments in Azeri media about needing a third country to release the POWs to, because Armenia arrests its own soldiers coming back.
Yeah.
Let me move on to the 3+3 issue. This past week, Deputy Foreign Minister Vahi Gevorkyan attended the Turkish proposed and so-called 3+3 platform for the discussion of regional problems. It's supposed to be Armenia, Georgia, Azerbaijan, as well as regional powers surrounding them, Iran, Russia, and Turkey. However, Georgia has been very clear from the very start that it's not going to participate, so the platform has been alternately called the 3+2. In any case, Armenia has indicated that it would participate if this platform is not used to discuss issues that are also being discussed in the OSCE-MG process or the trilateral Armenia, Azerbaijan, Russia post-war process. Benyamin, a question for you. What good can come from this platform? Why is Armenia accepting to participate? What's in it for Armenia here?
Okay, my understanding is that the platform is an attempt by Russia and Turkey to somehow manage the differences in South Caucasus. We all know that the Russia-Turkey relations, as for now, is cooperative competition or competitive cooperation or cooperation or rivalry. You may use different terms, but at least it seems that as for now, both Russia and Turkey are interested to somehow manage the competition and cooperation in the South Caucasus. And this platform is one of the ways or one of the tools to do that. What concerns for Armenia, because despite the fact that Prime Minister and Foreign Minister, they may declare that, okay, Nagorno-Karabakh issue, Armenia-Azerbaijan relations are not going to be discussed during the meetings in this format. Definitely they are going to be discussed, because these formats are being established to discuss the pressing regional issues. No one is establishing such formats, for example, to discuss the export of Azerbaijani tomatoes to Russia or increasing of Armenian wine export to Russia. So all understand that Nagorno-Karabakh, the future of Artsakh, Armenia-Azerbaijan relations will be discussed within this format. And the problem is that definitely this format is going to be transformed into the parallel platform for these issues, parallel to the OFA Minsk group. It was the case with Astana format in Syria, because when Astana format was established, previously there was a Geneva international format for Syrian discussions. And now two formats are functioning together.
Do you think that they will also discuss the opening of Armenian and Turkish relations to this? You know, given that 2 weeks ago it was announced publicly that Armenia sought Russia's help in establishing relations with Turkey, and if so, then does this mean that essentially Armenia has, or accepted Turkey's preconditions that are well known on this issue?
Frankly speaking, Armenia accepted Turkish preconditions even before this 3+2 or 3+3 format, because what were Turkish main preconditions? First, to give up Artsakh, And we have to accept that Armenia give up Artsakh, because now what remains from Artsakh, this is a Russia-controlled territory, and this is totally Russian business. What Russia will do with this 3,000 square kilometer of territory. It will keep their forces there, it will keep it as a Transnistria, it will transform it into South Ossetia, or whatever Russia will do. This is Russia's business. Armenia has nothing here to do, politically and geopolitically. And regarding the international recognition of Armenian genocide, if we look through the new Armenian government program, which Parliament confirmed in August 2021, there are very vague wording about international recognition of genocide. And for the first time, I believe, the Armenian leader during his speech in UN General Assemblies, I am referring to the Prime Minister Pashinyan's speech in September 2021, the Armenian leader had zero mention about Armenian genocide. So we have to accept that Armenia realized the two key Turkish preconditions even before the launch of this 3+2 format. I believe, yes, Armenia-Turkey relations also will be discussed, and definitely Russia is interested to see these discussions under its supervision rather than to see the discussions under European or American supervision. But again, I don't think that Armenia will gain anything, because by agreeing to discuss also Nagorno-Artsakh issue or Armenia-Azerbaijan relations issue, not Artsakh, because Azerbaijan is not going to discuss Artsakh issue within this format, I get. But the Armenia-Azerbaijan relations are going to be discussed. And allowing this, Armenia also accepts that Turkey is a legal mediator or legal participant to solve Armenia-Azerbaijan relations, which cannot bring us to any good place. So it will be problematic, but from another point of view, despite all Pashinyan rhetoric starting from May 2018, that he's going to restore Armenian sovereignty vis-a-vis Russia, we all remember his statement that, okay, previous presidents were Putin slaves, and he's now going to speak in equal terms with Putin, that Putin should understand that Armenia has been changed, and Putin, he will force Russia to accept the changes and blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, now, Armenia is more dependent on Russia than any time before September 1991. So if the Pashinyan government's real intention was to push out Armenia from Russia, the results are another proof of their total incompetence.
Yeah.
I'm rather concerned about these conversations, and I don't understand why Russia is for it, because I think we have discussed multiple times before that the main projection of power for the West into the South Caucasus, into Armenia, is through Turkey at present. And the main obstacle to that is that there's no relationship between Turkey and Armenia. The border is essentially a Cold War border. It's closed. There are no economic relationships. So if that were to be opened, and the West can suddenly now, let's call it, help Armenia or support it, it's going to be entirely through Turkey. And that's going to cut off Russia from the southern flank. Is this something that Russia wants? I mean, both Russia and Iran would be deeply opposed to this.
It does not want this, but I think that part of the idea, okay, so Asbed, you're a student of film, right? So you know Eisenstein, he had the film Alexander Nevsky. And in Nevsky, there was this line where he's talking about, well, we have the issue with the Mongols. We'll deal with them later. But right now, our issue, our main, adversary are the Teutonic Knights, the Germans. And this is kind of, I think, the approach that the Russians are taking now, that their big focus is the West and Ukraine. And they think, well, Turkey is an issue, but let's kind of, put it on the back burner for now. We'll manage our conflict with them through maybe these formats or whatever. But I also think, too, that this is going to be a very serious issue for them down the road, because if Turkey is able to push itself into the Caucasus, if Pashinyan actually, because Pashinyan, if he acts as somebody who wants to open up with Turkey and completely open the borders and all this and that, Turkey could really easily, push its way in, especially with these corridors. They could establish a link that would connect them directly with Azerbaijan. And then they could even, develop a deal, which they've already been kind of doing. Actually not even kind of, they've been doing, to get Azerbaijan to resolve its differences with Turkmenistan, because Turkmenistan has the fourth largest reserve of natural gas in the world, fourth or fifth. And to establish that, a corridor across the Caspian Sea to Central Asia that would allow the Azerbaijan, Turkey, Georgia energy corridor, alternative energy corridor from Russia, to gain real potential and real strength as a means of kind of countering Russia and countering Russian influence. It would massively undermine Russian influence, first and foremost in the Caucasus, because that's the heart of where this is all occurring, but also would undermine the Russian influence in Central Asia and in Europe too, in places like Ukraine, in places like Belarus. And so throughout the whole region, the Russian influence would be absolutely undermined. And it could be even dislodged. That's how serious this is, potentially, right? Benyamin and I wrote an article about this in Russian International Affairs Council recently. It's a very, very serious issue. So the Russians right now, they're trying to manage their relations with Turkey. They don't want a war there. You know, I mean, they're trying their best to kind of keep the situation under control. At the same time,
as I was saying earlier, it seems Russia has done everything it can to avoid a war.
But it's a very, very serious issue. The American War Party has been talking about this effort to get into the Caucasus and Central Asia and establish an alternative energy corridor for decades.
Asbed, you mentioned the West, but it should be noted that at least Georgia is against this. And I think there's a popular belief that the West in general is against this process itself because it sort of tries to keep the West out except through Turkey. So how do we reconcile that with what was said before?
So this whole process, I think, is mostly, first of all, it's a way for Russia to kind of placate Turkey's demands for the region. But it's also kind of a way, I think, for Russians to kind of manage their cooperation in the region. No serious observer would believe that Georgia would actually participate in this. Because back in 2008, Saakashvili cut all diplomatic ties with Russia. And so the diplomatic relations between Russia and Georgia, right now, Ivanishvili was able to establish some trade relations, some conduits of dialogue, right? Of course, the big issues are Abkhazia and South Ossetia. But the biggest issue is that they lack basic diplomatic relations. And even Ivanishvili's moves and the Georgian Dream's moves to rectify the situation have been met with ferocious opposition from Saakashvili's party and the oppositional parties in Georgia, who are opposed, of course, to the Georgian Dream. So this is why that Georgia realistically would not partake in a format such as this.
Benyamin, any final thoughts on this? Do you think that the 3+3 is just a way for Russia and possibly Iran to just manage this process rather than really support it politically?
My understanding is that mainly this is an effort by Russia to manage its competition with Turkey in South Caucasus, somehow to stabilize situation,
right?
Maybe to cement the post-2020 status quo. As for Iran position is very clear. Iran wants only one thing from South Caucasus. South Caucasus should not be used by United States and Israel for any anti-Iranian actions.
Mm-hmm.
So Iran is very concerned by Israel's influence in Azerbaijan. Iran is concerned that Israel will establish also influence and presence in the so-called liberated Azerbaijani territories. Iran is concerned that this airport, which was opened in Fizuli, and also another airport which Aliyev is going to establish in Zangilan, they are not only established only for bringing some Turkish tourists to Shushi, but also at the end of the day, they can be used for flight of military jets or military drones or reconnaissance Israeli drones. But also Iran understands that if you want to have less United States in South Caucasus, and if you have limited resources and your primary area of vital interest is Middle East, is Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, so called the Shia Crescent. So the only power which can push United States out from the region is Russia. So Iranian position is very clear. We want more Russia because more Russia means less US. Less US means less Israel. This is my basic understanding of Iranian's position on strategic level.
Okay. December 10 marks the 30th anniversary of the referendum that cemented the claim to self-determination and independence as the Republic of Nagorno-Karabakh declared upon the territory of the former Nagorno-Karabakh Autonomous Oblast, NKAO, within the Soviet Union. Artsakh President Arayik Harutyunyan addressed his country and affirmed the Republic's goals to seek full independence, security, and recovery of territories of Artsakh proper, which were lost to Azerbaijan during the 44-day war. The Armenian government made no statements on this anniversary. It simply published an article containing the full text of Harutyunyan's address in one of its newspapers. I think that speaks louder than words.
The fact that no Armenian government official reaction or comment was about the 30 years of independent referendums, this was a really disgrace. I
Yes.
cannot use any word, but disgrace. Like sending your representative to Moscow to sit very close to the Azerbaijani and Turkish deputy foreign ministers and discuss so-called regional cooperation in Moscow on the same day.
On the same day.
But didn't say, while not sending at least another deputy foreign minister to Stepanakert on the day of 30 years of Nagorno-Karabakh independence referendums, this is a disgrace. And this is a clear articulation that the current government believes that Artsakh is lost, and the maximum which these people can dream about is living in de jure Azerbaijan, de facto Russian-controlled protectorate as far as Russian troops are there. This is a best case scenario for current government. So they.
But this conflict, the Artsakh issue has, the Armenian people spent 30 years struggling, suffering individually and collectively as victims of blockade and aggression by Azerbaijan and Turkey. Can 30 years be undone like that? It seems surreal to me. It has touched every single Armenian home and generations.
Hovik, it goes even deeper than this, because Artsakh is the Vahan for Armenia. It's a strategic asset for Armenia. It should have been a red line for Armenia. And there, frankly, would be no post-Soviet Armenia. There would have been no Soviet Armenia. There would have been no, Russian Armenia had it not been for the Artsakh Meliks way back to petition the Russians to come into the Caucasus to begin with. So the idea Artsakh is intimately associated with the physical existence of the Armenians in the Caucasus. So this attitude that the government has toward Artsakh is absolutely beyond the pale. And frankly, some people affiliated with government, saying negative things about people from Artsakh, to me is absolutely obscene.
Pietro, maybe we should establish a course at the AUA for the Armenian government.
Maybe.
So before we close, Pietro, do you have anything else to add to what we have discussed today?
Yeah, I have a rant. So you have American foreign policy makers, I guess we can call them that, ex-diplomats, right? People like Richard Hoagland of the OSCE Minsk Group, the former OSCE Minsk Group representative, writing lavish praise of Aliyev. To have American foreign policy elites writing such words about the dictatorship in Azerbaijan, to me, I think is absolutely disgraceful, especially considering the fact that Armenian Americans have given so much to the United States. Think about, for example, all of those Armenian Americans who served in World War II, from Boston, from Los Angeles, from New York, from North Jersey, from Cleveland, from Chicago, from all over the country, right? The Armenian Americans are some of the most dedicated people to the American dream that you will ever meet. And the fact that you have American foreign policy elites who just completely disregard the Armenian people and their right for survival, it's just disgraceful. And it's anti-American. It's against the principles of American democracy to oppose people who are fighting for their self-determination, as the people from Artsakh have been for 30 years. So that's my rant.
Benjamin, do you have a short rant?
Yes, very shortly, I will add only one thing, that fully agree with Pietro, that Artsakh was indeed the shield of Armenia, and if really we lost it, because the shield is broken, but shield is destroyed, but shield is not totally destroyed. If that shield will be totally destroyed, I am afraid we all, at least Republic of Armenia as a state, will face very bad fate and very negative, disastrous outcomes, even not negative. It will be full disaster if the Artsakh will be ruined completely. Because now it's very hardly damaged, severely damaged, but still is functioning.
All right. We're going to leave it there today. Thank you, everyone. Pietro, Benjamin, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Okay, that was our Week in Review show, and we hope it helped you catch up with some of the issues in and around Armenia from this past week. As always, we invite your feedback and your suggestions. You can find us on most social media and podcast platforms or our website, groong.org. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel on YouTube, like our pages, and follow us on social media. On behalf of everyone in this episode, we wish you a good week. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.